pronounce your name correctly for me?
So it's Carlo Savo. I am what I like to call a recovering auctioneer. So,
probably legitimate from what I understand.
Yeah, I literally grew up in the business. My father started back in the 80s, and he was doing back then mostly commercial. He would do things like JCPenney's catalog returns, because back then they would just store them in a warehouse because they weren't allowed to put them back out in the store. So we would get tractor trailer loads of that kind of stuff, excess building materials from, job sites, all perfectly usable stuff, just stuff that wasn't put in the retail end of it. And then he would do bankruptcies. He did a lot of restaurants and things like that. And as that sort of faded away and got more controlled by the attorneys and the banks that were involved, it was harder to kind of be in that business. He had a little break for a while, and then we got back into the antiques and art end of it, as well as coins, firearms, and a little bit of real estate we would do. I became a fully licensed auctioneer in 2000. I did it for 16 years as a full-time professional. And in Pennsylvania, you have to be licensed by the state. So you have to serve a 2-year apprenticeship. I think they have a school now. But when I did it, you had to serve a 2-year apprenticeship, then take a state board, believe it or not. And then you're licensed and bonded by the state.
I find it so funny that you have to do all that just to be able to sell something. Whereas I could buy a gun in 24 hours at Walmart.
Oh, when we had a firearms license through the business, and as long as you passed your background check, you could buy a gun in an hour.
Yeah, I always wonder whether I would actually pass that background check.
It can be interesting. We had a gentleman buying an antique revolver once, and it was purely just an antique piece. It was going to go in a showcase somewhere. It was a very old Colt. And he had all the proper paperwork and licensing and all that nonsense. We're filling out the paperwork, and it came back, and the state police, because all the background checks go through the state police in PA, we're like, nah, he can't have it. And they don't tell us why. And it's like, okay.
Well, that's the question.
Yeah.
It's like, is there something from my past that has made it so that I potentially could not? Don't get me wrong, I do not want to, but yeah. I kind of just want to know if I would qualify.
The poor guy, he wound up clearing it up, but he found out it was disorderly conduct back when he was 16 years old. And this guy was about 60. And I was like, seriously? That was still on your record?
Oh, well, then I'm screwed because I was under investigation by the DEA. So.
Oh, well, that's not. Yeah, that you'd probably have some issues.
Yeah, it's fine. I have no interest in buying a firearms. But interestingly enough, you were also on a Nat Geo television show.
Right. We have that in common, don't we?
Yeah, that's right. So was I.
Now, did someone in the Emirates produce it, or was it produced directly by Nat Geo?
No, ours was a secondary company that produced it and basically sold it to Nat Geo.
That's what we did. Ours was through Cosgrove Muir, who were the people who did Unsolved Mysteries, or still doing Unsolved Mysteries. They found us and approached us about making a TV show. This was in 2010. We were like, yeah, sounds interesting. Let's do it. We were a small company. We were not a big company. And as a matter of fact, the year they grabbed us to do the show, we were about ready to call it quits. After the financial hit in 2008, when everything went to hell, the auction business, especially the arena we were in, and things weren't so great, and we were touring with the idea of like, how much longer are we going to do this? This has been really, really rough. And they came just at a time when it really helped us. It helped save the business, and we had several very good years after this show had aired. We only wound up doing 3 one-hour episodes, because by the time we started filming the show and the time it aired, one of the higher-ups changed. And by the time they saw our project, and they were like, yeah, we're not going to do this. So.
Well, don't worry. I mean, I did a whole season of mine, but it was so low budget that it's kind of embarrassing. I mean, the on-location stuff was really beautiful and lovely, and no problems with that. But our set that they built for us, oh my God, I had better sets like in my college dorm. It was so bad. And it was really embarrassing. What sort of upset me later is they did a season 2 of it. And they built the most beautiful set for it. I mean, it's gorgeous. And I'm like, God damn it, why couldn't I have been on that season?
That was sort of the same thing with us. It was like 2 years later, we got a brand new building. We really upgraded everything because we were able to just from publicity, take the business to the next step. It really helped us out. I was like, why couldn't they have filmed us when we were here? Everything, said we were on our last leg when they were filming. And
because nobody wants to see the story of somebody succeeding. They want to see the story of somebody struggling.
Yeah. Well, they got the story. I think one of the other reasons we probably didn't last with them is we were kind of difficult. It was a family business. My father, my brother, we were all partners. It was at the time when the motorcycle guys were on the air and they were big. What was it? Orange County Choppers, or I think it was. And they were that family that, was the father and son, and they were constantly button heads.
Oh, yeah, they were.
And they thought we were going to be that way. And it's like, yeah, we could be that way, but we're not going to do it in front of a camera.
I don't get me wrong. The Nat Geo TV show I was on was a competition show. So there was no actual real personalities in it kind of thing. I mean, maybe the contestants did all that, but I don't know because they did it all in Arabic. So I have absolutely no idea what they said. As far as the judges, my role in it, it was just, I came in, I judged, I walked away, I mentored, whatever, and I left. Luckily, I did not have to bear my demons on television.
Yeah, they were looking for a lot of that kind of stuff. And we weren't those kind of people. It was an interesting lesson in what reality TV really is, because I can't tell you how many times it was like, well, say it this way. Well, let's do it again, but say this. It's like, I would never say that. Like, why would I say that? It's like,
They actually did that?
Oh, all the time. Yeah, all the time. It was.
I had no idea.
Yeah, let's do it again. Or, let me get it from this angle. And when you come in, why don't you comment about this when you come in? It's like, can't we just be the people that we normally are? And they did catch a lot of us as we were, but it was amazing how many suggestions would be made while you were filming. And I think that's one of the reasons, like I said, it didn't work out so well, because we didn't take direction very well.
But I understand that from a production standpoint, because they're burning time and burning money when they're waiting for something interesting to happen, and that's not the way they want to work. They want to try and get it fast and quick and cheap, and so they want to create things. But almost all those quote unquote reality things, I feel like if they just spent enough time there, they probably would catch some crazy stupid shit, but they just don't want to put that time in.
And the auction business is such a strange business. You meet such strange people, interesting people from every single walk of life. I've met every kind of buyer, and I've talked to people all over the world. We would always try to tell them, it's the people. The people are what are interesting. The buyers, the sellers, that's where the stories are. The stuff is the stuff. Almost everything we sold, you could find anywhere. We got some interesting things once in a while that, were pretty unique. But on any auction house anywhere in America, everybody's kind of selling the same type of stuff, just varying degrees of value, I guess.
I think that the interesting part of it is the relationship between who the person is and the stuff. So why do they give a shit enough to either own and or want to own that thing that's possibly not very special? And what makes that relationship between the object and the person, potentially crazy person, very unique?
Yeah, collectors are an interesting group of people. And there's a couple different types. You get the people who collect because they think they're making some kind of investment and that they're going to cash in later on. Most of those people wind up losing money. You got to be exceptionally savvy and understand markets and understand how things work in the future in order to make that kind of investment and cash in later on. There's a few things that hold and will always be worth more. Coins are a good one because at the very worst, you have the precious metal value of a coin. Or if it's U.S. currency, it's always going to be worth whatever the United States government says it's worth. So, that might change now with all this new digital stuff, but, but at least if you're buying precious metal, you have precious metal. Firearms were fairly stable collectible, but these people that got into things like Hummels, collector plates, all this type of fad stuff, you try to explain to people as a professional, it's like, look, you're getting into collecting. That's great. Collect the things you like. Put it in your house because you really like it. And if you make money when you go to sell it, great. But I know people who had literal warehouses filled with things they thought were going to be valuable and they were going to retire. They now have garbage bills. Roseville was one. I knew someone who collected Roseville, which was an art pottery from Ohio. It was very, very collectible from the 80s into the late 90s. And the prices kept going up and up and up and up and up. And then probably the mid-aughts, the collectors just went away. Everybody went we don't like it anymore. and the price just went from, a vase that was $300, $400, $500 went down to $10.
What's interesting, I've been watching a lot of those kind of like reality shows, American Pickers, Pawn Stars, all those kind of crap. Yeah. I mean, they have their own problems, I know, but but nonetheless, like I've been watching it, and it is interesting to think about like that. Not only is it certain things are collectible and certain things are valuable and all this kind of stuff, but there's also the fact that like the people who are collecting a lot of these things, even in art. So, I mean, because this is an art podcast, but like even in art, as the collectors get older, like a lot of them, the interest in some of these art things that are doing very well will fall off also, because like a generation will end of people who appreciated, let's say, that particular time period in art or that medium or whatever. And it'll take another, 10, 15 years for like another generation to come in. And so there's this constant wave of sort of collecting and not, interest and not interest and collection, not collection of everything.
Yeah. And you see that mostly in that sort of middle range of collecting. The very high-end museum-type pieces retain their value. That's because, A, they're desirable, and there's also a lot of manipulation on that end of the market. And we can get into that. But in that
Please
middle,
do.
Yeah, in that middle of the road, it fluctuates because, it's in and out of favor. And that's probably the most open part of the market. That's sort of between, the $100 collectible, I'd say all the way up to maybe about 5,000 is a range where it's going to fluctuate. It's going to be all over the place. That stuff's going to come into fashion, out of fashion. At the low end, nobody cares anyway. If you're buying little trinkety stuff because you like little trinkety stuff for your house, nobody cares if one day it's worth $1 and the next day it's worth 20. It doesn't matter. You get in that middle of the road.
But that's a huge return on investment.
Yeah. I mean, if you got hundreds of them, it's a huge return on investment.
But if you have hundreds of them, they're not as valuable.
Yes, scarcity could be a strange thing. The market gets so manipulated.
You don't say.
Auctions are supposed to be, the definition a lot of people use, or that we use professionally, would be that the auction is designed to get the highest and best price, which is true. The other half of it is the highest and best price on that day with that audience, with that thing. All of that has an impact of what the price is going to be. And if you let it just be that way with no controls, no manipulation of any kind, prices will be all over the place for a lot of different items. And we used to see it with stuff that nobody really was worried about what it was going to bring. One day it brought $100. The next day it brought $500. I don't know why there was a change. There was two people there that wanted it more. That happens at an auction. And if you talk to any auctioneer, you can get to be honest about it. That's part of the business. But there's a lot of things auction companies use to manipulate that. There's the whole reserves is one of the first things we do. So if somebody has an item that they want a particular amount of money out of, they're going to say, you can't sell it for less than this price. And you can agree to that as an auctioneer, or you could turn to them and say, you're completely out of your mind. It's never going to bring that kind of money. And you just don't put it up. So a lot of auction houses from the highest end to the lowest end do work with reserves. They can manipulate the scarcity of an item. There was an instance about 10 years ago now where a gentleman, I think somewhere out west, found in his grandfather's attic. I might be getting some of these details wrong, but this is the gist of the story. He found in an attic an entire shoebox filled with tobacco cards. Now, tobacco cards were the earliest form of the sports cards that were literally in the back of cigarette packs back in the early 20th century.
I know. I watch Pawn Stars.
Yeah. So there's a couple that are extremely valuable. Honus Wagner being one. That's the most valuable. It's a specific card, but that's the most valuable baseball card I think there is. It was Honus Wagner, Ty Cobb, and a couple of the other really big names from that era. And it was a literal shoebox filled with these cards, and they were all perfect. Well, he thought he hit the gold mine. A perfect Honus Wagner, I think, is worth over $1 million. I've been out of the market a little bit, so that might be way more now.
It doesn't fluctuate that much.
Yeah, it might be a lot more. It's definitely not less. But so he took it to one of the bigger auction companies in the country. I won't say anybody's name because I don't want any phone calls. And
no, wait, here, I want you to say it, and I promise you I will bleep it out. Because I enjoy doing the bleep thing. It's a fun sound effect to put in.
It was all public anyway, so I'm being dramatic. It was, and so he took it to them because they have a reputation for comic books and memorabilia and that thing. And kind of got a look at him. We're like, we can't put these up. And I said, what do you mean you can't? Like, I want to sell them. We can't put them all up at once. And the reason being is, the reason a Honus Wagner is worth so much money is because there's literally a handful of them in the world that are perfect. You can't go from having 5 perfect ones, just to use a number, and then all of a sudden put 10 more in the market and expect everything to be worth the same. So they'll manipulate the scarcity of these items, like put one up every year or try to sell them privately or whatever it is they have to do to control the price of the ones that are already out there, you know.
Okay, wait, just to be clear though, you're saying what they do. Did you ever do this?
We weren't really selling at a level where we had to do something like that. We were usually very happy to get something that was that high end. We would work with reserve if we felt it merited it. If you had a lot of something, it was generally a part of a big collection anyway. Our philosophy was when you had a large collection, you had multiples of one item. It was better for everybody. It was going to draw more attention. More people were going to show up. And it usually worked out in our favor. There were a lot of auctioneers who was like, well, you can't put all of those up at once. Whatever the item was you were discussing, it'll affect the price. We never found it to work out that way.
It's an interesting dilemma. I mean, like, let's say, because I'm going to try and keep this with art. So let's say like you have like a collector that comes and says, hey, I have 5 Andy Warhols. And you're like, well, if you put up one at a time, you're right. You might get more for each one individually. But if you put up all 5 in a single auction, you're going to draw more buyers who then might be willing to pay more. So like, the volume of the stuff in the auction would be more attractive for more people to want to be there.
Yeah, we always find the collectors are, I mean, what would you rather, especially if you were traveling, at that time? Most of it's done on the internet now, but if you were going to travel to an auction, I'd want to go to a place where I have a chance, there's enough of things that I have a chance of walking out with something rather than try and go and fight over one item. Unless that item was extremely special, which was rare. Auction houses use a lot of different techniques to try to manage the prices, and the biggest guys are the masters at it. One of the weird things that they do that makes me insane, especially at the highest level, is, like Sotheby's and Christie's don't charge a commission to the seller. They will use that as leverage to get the best stuff. If you're just an average Joe with average Joe stuff, what's average to them, you're going to get probably nailed a seller's fee and an advertising fee and a this fee and a that fee. But if you got a house full of Monets, you're not going to be charged any kind of commission.
Well, it's an interesting thing because like I always wonder how the auction houses make enough money to do what they do, because I mean, not only do they do what they do so well and so manipulatively and all this kind of stuff, but they also do it under such a shroud of secrecy, because the only people that have any sense of how it works, quite honestly, are probably the people working at the place. Maybe a collector or a seller that has engaged with them a lot and kind of like sold and bought a lot might know some, but it's so shrouded that it sort of bothers me, because there's always the question of like, okay, so this piece goes up for auction. Why has it been valued at this? Who the fuck that said that's that price worth that much?
When you're dealing with normal day-to-day stuff like, estates and things like that, a good auctioneer should value items based on what they've gotten for that same or similar item in the past. You're just kind of taking an average in your mind. But it always came with the caveat, like, first of all, what condition is yours in? Is it the right color? Is it popular right now? And a slew of other things that are going to go into it. But you make your best guess. On the higher end of it, when you're selling something, like a Monet for $40 million, it's one of his water lilies or something, you've already taken out most people in the world, because a lot of people are very wealthy, but to come up with 40 million cash to pay for something, that's a whole different kind of money. So it's generally corporations that wind up buying these things, and they're buying it based on the idea. And some of this is my opinion and some of this is fact. They're buying it with the idea that when they go to sell it, they're going to make more money. They generally don't buy it to, well, they don't buy it to lose money, that's for sure.
Well, oftentimes corporations are buying art because it's a tax write-off. When they take a corporate profit and turn around and purchase art, it ends up being tax deductible for them for that year.
It's not so much even a tax deduction because, I mean, you still have to pay for the item, as it is a way to put cash into an asset. It's the same thing they do with real estate. It's a place to put cash. Cash can fluctuate. You know, it's they can't ship pallets of cash to a free port and hide it there. But I could buy a painting and send
They
it there.
might be able to. I don't know. I haven't spoken to a Freeport person yet,
Yeah.
but it is possible there are just pallets of cash in there as well. I would imagine pallets of precious metals for sure, golds, platinums, that kind of stuff.
I'm sure somebody's got it. I'm sure a stockpile somewhere. It's something that's starting to happen now too with the change in tastes. Where was it I was reading that some of the auction houses now are getting a little upset that Banksy is selling so well at auction, and there's a craze for his type of work. And some of the stuff that used to be that everybody was nuts for, modern, postmodern art, interest is starting to wane. You know, well, that becomes a problem when you've built your business around selling those types of pieces.
Well, that's what I was saying about like the generation of people sort of aging out of buying more works and stuff. And so like even I consider like auction house like the secondary market. So like even on the secondary market, there's the same ebbs and flows of collectors and interest and stuff like that there is in the primary market in the arts.
Believe it or not, profit margins are thin for an auction house. It seems
I knew that.
It seems like they're making millions upon millions upon millions, but it's the amount of money it costs to run an auction house. And then if you're not taking a commission from the seller, you're only taking it from the buyer, what they call the buyer's premium. You're losing money. And that's the one thing that drives me crazy about that. It's like, okay, I get the tactic. I get you want to get the best stuff. And so you'll say to the seller, look, we won't take anything from you. Well, you just give us the stuff, we'll sell it, and all the money will come from the buyer when they buy it. But it's saying to the seller, what we do for you isn't worth anything.
Well, but what I don't understand, okay, so like those fees and premiums and all this kind of stuff, why are they always added on secretly after the auction or all this kind of stuff? Like, why? What I don't understand is why isn't it just included in the price? Like, if I say I'm going to buy this for $1 million, then you take your fees out of that $1 million, not add on an additional fee to that $1 million.
Well, if you were taking from the seller, what you would do is, and this is how we operated, you'd sell for the seller, you get a percentage of whatever that's sold for. And then from the buyer's side, you would add on a percentage, which is all up front. You know it right going into it, how much you're going to pay and what's called the buyer's premium. I think ours was 13% from the buyer. Plus then your sales tax, whatever state you were in, you had to add on their sales tax. So all of that was totally upfront. And Christie's and Sotheby's and Bonhams and Phillips and all those people, the people buying know exactly what the buyer's premium is. Theirs is astronomical. I think it's almost, Sotheby's is 27%. Might be closer to 30 now, because that's the only way they make a commission.
Again, I just find that utterly ridiculous. Like, I mean, that's like me going into the grocery store and saying, here's the thing of milk that's $2. Okay, but when I take it to the register, no, it's $2.60.
Right.
Because there's a buyer's premium on
right.
buying this milk. Like, what the fuck is that? Like, that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world other than auctions, which is a completely fictitiously made up thing to try and just do this. Like, I don't understand why they don't just like build the prices all in and make it all sort of clearer and more transparent. I mean, that's my fundamental problem is the lack of transparency.
It's the auction business can be a bit opaque. I'll give you that, especially if you're an outsider to it. I mean,
I am.
On our end of it, when I was an auctioneer and we were collecting the 13% buyer's premium, it covered a lot of costs on our end. Just administrative costs and things like that. And then you had, the profit from the seller too, because the overhead is just ridiculous between all the licensing fees and insurances and rents. And it's just expense. Get me wrong, we made money. We ran a business. So it's something that helps defer some of the cost. It shouldn't be the way you make all your money, in my opinion. People who buy from the higher end companies are very frustrated by that because you're paying 50, 60, 100 million for something, which are some of the prices they're getting for a lot of these items now. And then you got to add another 27% on top of that, and whatever relevant taxes there are at the time it's sold. It's like, it becomes an astronomical fee. And I wonder too if it's hurting the selling price on some of these items too. I mean, some buyers don't think about it and they just pay when they get their bill. And then some people go, well, now I'm going to have to pay another, 30% and this and that. And, so I'm not going to be willing to go as high as I was going to go. And it's less money in the seller's pocket at the end of the day. There's been a lot of back and forth in the industry, over whether or not a buyer's premium should be charged. I think just about everybody does it now, except for maybe some of the smaller companies don't charge any buyer's premium, which I don't know if it's helping them or hurting them at this point, honestly, to just totally forget about the buyer's premium.
Again, I go back to my milk example.
Yeah. I mean, it's rough on the buyer. And even at the highest end of spending, most of the stuff being bought is going into dealer hands. A lot of the stuff purchased at auction isn't going into the private collector. The super very, very special stuff is, but a lot of just not that many what we call end users to get every single item into the hands of a collector. There has to be somebody to sort of clean up the bulk stuff. That's good and brings money, but it's just not going into the hands of a collector that day. It's not just seller, auctioneer, collector. There's a whole network of people involved in the business. The really old days when my father was doing it and I was really young, before the internet, it was almost like a hierarchy. There was the local auction that was taking everything out of estates, and some dealer would scoop something up, and then it would go to his guy that buys that stuff. And then that guy, maybe there was another guy in between where that either operated in a city where they could get a little more for it, or they were really close with the collectors that bought that type of items. So there was a hierarchy. This guy paid this much, then this guy could sell it for this much, and then the next guy sold it to that, and then eventually it wound up in the hands of a collector.
I thought that's how it works.
Yeah, and
you just explained what I assumed.
Well, not everybody knows about this stuff.
I know not just enough to be dangerous. That's all. So go on.
The internet sort of took some of those steps out when eBay became really hot. The average person can go to an auction and grab. I mean, there was a time when you could literally sell anything on eBay. I mean, people were getting $300 for toasters that were sitting up in their attics just because they were shiny. And it was and it was great because we would clear out entire houses. I mean, you would just take the dust and you could sell all of it. And at the end of the day, everybody was smiles because they were going to make money. You made money. The seller couldn't believe you took all that stuff and they made money. And then as it all started to calm down and everybody realized I just spent $300 on a chrome toaster that probably doesn't work or is going to explode because the wiring's no good, And they also started to realize stuff they thought was rare wasn't that rare,
It is an issue that the internet created because prior to the internet, we all thought the things that basically we saw that we had never seen anywhere else in our lives were like, oh my gosh, this is incredibly rare. Nobody has this. I haven't seen anybody who has this. And then suddenly the internet opens up and you're like, oh, they're fucking everywhere.
Yeah.
It's like they're just not in my neighborhood, but they're everywhere.
It's like, oh, look, there's 100 of them on eBay right now. I could buy anyone I want in various conditions. And
yeah,
that killed a lot of the market. And that's when things started to really change. And we had to start getting much pickier about the types of items we put through sales. And a lot of the auction houses began to specialize or to put together, different types of sales. And a lot of and since my brother and I quit in 2016. And since then, a lot of the smaller companies have either been purchased by other mid-sized companies or just are completely out of business. Because it got to a point where what you could sell at a live auction was just such a select group of things that you'd have to go into somebody's house and look and say, I'll take these 12 things. The rest of it, you just either going to have to do something with yourself or throw it out. And people look at you like you were insane. Like, are you telling me everything in this house now is a liability? It's like, yeah.
Again, that's exactly how I thought it went, that you pretty much went in and cherry picked, I believe we can get a good price for that there and this there and everything else is your responsibility.
That's how they do it, at the highest level, where it's like, look, we can sell these will go in our cataloged sale. Some of the bigger guys do have their average stuff too, because they can't refuse everything. Just because it's not worth $1 million doesn't mean they don't want to sell it. It just has to go on a different type of sale. I mean, there was a time when the auction industry was whatever it's the whole house. We'll take everything out of the house. Everything will sell. It's going to be a wide range of prices, but you'll have an empty house at the end of the day. And this was for high end estates to low end estates, and everybody's going to get a piece of the action. It slowly started to evolve into, on every level, like there's just certain things people don't want. It changed. The whole thing changed. And it made it very difficult to do business. And it got to a point where we just got tired of going into people's houses. It was usually dealing with someone had just passed. It was a father, a mother, a grandparent or something. So everybody's already upset. And then you got to go in and say, look, the console television and this and that thing. It's like, guys, it just has to go in the garbage. We could sell these couple of things. They'd look at you and now they're furious because it's like, now we got to pay someone to remove these items instead of you sell it for us and we get money. It's sorry,
Well, it is a bit arrogant to believe that everything in your house is valuable, though, too.
But it didn't help when they started running these TV shows, too, like The Road Show and everything. Because, look, the average person can't tell the difference between a high-end piece of glassware and something their grandparent bought at Walmart. It just, if you're not used to it, sometimes those things
is
you
that
see.
true? People can't tell the difference?
People have no idea. I'll give you an example.
I come from a very privileged background. Well, not very privileged, but a privileged access, let's say. So like I was around a lot of rich people. And so like I can tell the difference.
So you see those things. But when you grow up in an area where the history is coal mining and most people were blue collar, and it's not that they don't have good things or things that are of value. It's not the same type of thing that they're seeing on TV. I mean, I had somebody come in the gallery once. They literally threw 6 watches on a table in front of me. He goes, "Is this crap worth anything?" And I looked at it. Every one of them was a Rolex. And I said, "Yeah, we'd be happy to sell these for you, And we did the paperwork. At the end of the day, I forget what his check was for, $20,000 or something. And boy, I wish I had them now. They're about tripled in value.
I was going to say, how did this person come into possession of 5 Rolexes?
They were his uncles. He was cleaning out his uncle's estate, and he kept doing this. He kept bringing us stuff like, "Are these worth anything? Are these?" He brought us a box. It was a big box filled with original Betty Page photos from the days when you sent away and they mailed you the photos. He had a huge collection of them. And we sold them all as one collection. And that was just when I think the movie had come out. So she was super popular. It was amazing. Everything he brought us, he thought was complete junk. And he wound up with thousands of dollars at the end of the day. And then you get the other end of it, where somebody comes in with a lamp that, has a glass shade with fruit on it. And they go, "This is a Tiffany, right?" No, it's a touch lamp from 1980. Yeah, it's like, well, no, but it looks like a Tiffany. Looks like and is are not the same thing, And they, I saw it on the road show. I saw it. It's like, no, you don't understand. Did you listen when they told you the history of that item and, like where it came from?
Did you listen when it said it must be signed with the name Tiffany on it?
Yeah, Well, they didn't. Yeah, that was one of my
Tiffany's, like owned by Tiffany, but Tiffany.
Louis Comfort Tiffany. Oh, he was a person? Yes, that person existed. Louis Comfort Tiffany started in the jewelry business. Mm-hmm. But even stuff like that is strange, too, because I got to know a collector who is into very high-end glass. He has a collection that belongs in a museum, and it's sitting in a bunch of boxes in his house because he refuses to sell any of it. He drove me insane. I could go up to the house and try to convince him to sell a piece. Like, let's try this one. We'll just try one piece. Well, all right, but I got to get exactly this much for it. I said, well, you're about 3 times what anybody's going to pay for it. So I don't know what you want me to do for you. But you get to talking to him about the history of his collecting, and he just had a really good eye. He wasn't a professional dealer or anything. I think he was in plumbing, actually. He just had an excellent eye, and he knew how to buy things. And when you get to that level of collecting, you start to realize it's like 6 people involved in really that market at the highest level. And he would tell a story. He says, you buy a Tiffany lamp, a legitimate Tiffany lamp, and you take it, and these guys would go, well, we don't really like the colors in this lamp. We'll make it look better. We'll replace the lamp this, and we'll do that to it. And they would do this stuff all the time. And then they would go to another auction house. And I was saying to him, so you're telling me all the stuff that they tell you is original and it's this and don't mess with it. It's like you guys were taking glass out of the stuff and changing it. And yeah, that's what to make it look better, to make it what the collectors wanted.
I think that interest has changed. I think there
Yeah.
was certainly a time when that was done, absolutely, but I think that has hopefully lessened.
Yeah. Weird crap like that had happened all the time. Art's a funny one if you want to talk about art, since
of course I do.
An art podcast. A lot of these painters that start out, well, every painter now starts out as a nobody.
I resent that, but go on.
Well, you might have you might have collectors or patrons in your lifetime, and you might do very well. But to reach then the highest levels of where some of these paintings trade at now, there's a whole process that's involved, and it usually starts with somebody buying up a whole bunch of your work. And we were involved at a very beginner level with a painter. His stuff is just starting to come out a little bit more. His name was Frederick Caroli, and he was a contemporary of Pollock, Rothko, and I think he was friends with Picasso, or they knew each other somehow. The history on him is kind of sparse, but he was an abstract expressionist to that whole postmodern movement, and his stuff wound up, I think, in a storage unit in New Jersey. And somebody I knew bought a whole bunch of them when they sold out the storage unit. And I'd go to see him once in a while to get stuff for auction. And he'd always point to these gigantic paintings in the corner. He goes, "You want to sell those?" I go, "Yeah, we'll look at them next time." So finally I said, "All right, let's try some of these paintings and see what we can do with them." So we put them up in a sale. We immediately get a call from Russia. And this gentleman from Russia was like, I want to buy all these paintings. I was like, "All right, just put your bid in." He wound up buying them. It was 3 paintings. It wasn't a lot of money. I think it was $1,000 or $2,000 a piece for these paintings, larger works. Because the guy's pretty much a nobody, the painter. The original seller says to us, "Then, well, you want to sell a couple more?" I said, "All right, let's put them up." The Russian guy buys them again. And then we get to talking to him then, because he's calling fairly regularly because we got to get him to Moscow or wherever he was. And he says, basically, he was buying all of them. Anyone he could find, he was buying a Caroli. He was having them cleaned up, restretched, whatever they needed to be, and then shipping them to Russia, where he's going to probably exhibit them or have a gallery and slowly let them out to market. And as each one gets let out, they'll try to get the prices up more and more. And that's how a lot of this stuff goes from you've never heard of them before to suddenly, in a decade, the prices have quadrupled, have gone 10 times, because it's this slow leak of, "Oh, this one went for this much. You should check out this artist." And then the next one does a little bit more, and it has to do a little bit more, because if it goes up next and then the prices go down, nobody wants to touch it.
I mean, that whole scenario, I mean, it's fascinating in and of itself, but there's a whole set of other sort of auction-y things that just make the whole system, because there's a difference between auctioning an artist who's passed away and now in Europe, which I didn't even know existed until just recently. Like, there are auctions of living artists on the secondary market. Like, I didn't even know that was an option. I sort of just, in my mind, I was like, auctions are only for dead artists.
Well, they sold I don't know, I think the record's changed now, but at one time the record for the highest price for living artists was Lucian Freud.
It keeps going back and forth between Lucian Freud and Hockney. Freud goes back and forth.
Freud's dead now, so he can't hold that.
He's out of the running. He's out of the running now.
But he sold that.
I remember it going back and forth between Hockney and Freud for a while there.
They had a piece up. It's got to be at least 7 years ago now. It was, I can't remember the name of the painting. It was the
triptych.
No, it was the one where the lady asleep on the sofa. It was a very large work, Lucian Freud, and it sold for $35 million. And Freud was still alive at the time, and I don't think he got a dime of that. And I think about a week later he died.
Well, and that's a topic I wanted to ask you about, because like there are some places in the world, Europe right now, and even California has now started doing it, where they're doing this sort of royalties that need to be paid back to either living artists, or if there's an estate, they also have to give a royalty back. Like, why is that not a law? Like, that, to me, that should be obviously done.
I think it's definitely a good way to think of it now. not to throw this into the conversation, but I'm going to anyway. I'm a painter myself, and I have collectors, and I've sold work. I've sold some of my own work at auction.
And so now you understand our side of it.
I get both sides of it, to sell a piece to somebody, take it from a strictly business end of it. If you treat the artwork just like a product, I sell you this product, I sell you a car, and then you go and sell the car and make more money. Well, it doesn't matter. I sold you the car, you bought it, you paid me what I wanted. If you make a profit on it, you make a profit on it. So if you look at a painting that way, the artist put it out, it's his product or her product, and they got what they wanted for it. And if you make a profit on it, you make a profit on it. As an artist, you look at it and go, well, it's still my image, and there's only one of them, and it's came from my brain. Shouldn't I get something for it because you made more money on me, on my work?
Well, technically they should, because I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, okay, but if somebody buys a BMW from BMW, and then they sell that BMW, they don't give any money back to BMW when
Correct.
they resell it. So like, I get the idea of like products, so like just product. But when it comes to a piece of art, the intellectual property and the sort of rights of reproduction and basically the ownership of the image itself is still with the artist, even though a person may own the painting of it or the sculpture of it or whatever. It's the sort of the rights of it are still under the either living artist or their estate, if there is one. And so if one of those two things exist, they should be giving some money back to them simply because of the rights element.
Yeah, and I think if it's thought of more in like a photography sense, product photographer or any kind of photographer can sell a print. But just because you bought the print or even bought usage rights for that print doesn't mean you can now just go do whatever you want with it. It's still the photographer's work, unless they sold those rights to you, which I think is the way, an artist should be treated. An artist isn't selling you the right to do, and they don't have that right. Like if you buy a painting from a living painter, you can't just go out and make prints now and sell the prints.
Correct. I hope.
Yeah. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Same thing would have.
I don't keep up with the laws, but I'm pretty sure you're right that is illegal. It should be illegal. How about that?
When Wyeth was still alive, I'm pretty sure when he sold his work, he would negotiate about who had the rights to make the prints and things like that. I don't think when you bought a Wyeth, you could just do what you wanted with it. Well, it was his wife, I believe, was a pretty savvy business person. They were very careful about the work, especially since it's so hard to make a living as an artist. I think something should go back, especially if you want them to keep creating. If you're a collector and you're spending that kind of money at auction, you want them to make more work. You want them.
Or maybe you don't, because then your piece will become more valuable. I mean, there are all kinds of cunning plans in there.
That is the thing that happens. People ask, well, how come an artist's work is worth so much after their death? Is because they can't make any more.
That's right.
That's it. That whatever's out there now is out there.
But yeah, I mean, this whole issue of royalties, though, like I love that. I mean, the only places I know that it's been put in places in the EU and in California. There's that. I think it's great. I had no idea about it prior to doing this podcast, and now I'm reasonably well informed about it, and I'm very pleasantly surprised that is happening. I'm sad to hear it didn't exist before, but I'm hoping that it starts happening more in more places.
I know the auction houses are not thrilled about it.
I don't fucking care.
Well, just speaking from someone that was inside the industry,
I am not here to benefit the auction houses.
It's to them. It's it's another fee. It's cost of doing business. There's a cost to every transaction. So you got to just look at it, and it's not going to stop them from selling the work. Especially the big three. The way they manipulate the market, they claim they're not a monopoly, but there's nowhere else to go with work of a certain value or an antique of a certain value. You're going to Christie's, you're going to Sotheby's, and Phillips is trying real hard, and they're getting there. And they've worked very hard to keep that status. And that's why they don't charge a lot of the sellers a commission, because they want the stuff coming through them. They don't want to have to compete with anybody else.
I feel like, though, this is like price fixing and manipulation. I mean, these are all the kinds of things that, like, large corporations have regulations on them. So it sounds to me like the auction industry has little to no regulatory oversight.
They do and they don't. I mean, like in Pennsylvania, there is a board of auctioneers that you fall under their jurisdiction, and there's lots. Any law that applies to any other business applies to you.
Well, but then price fixing is against the law.
Price fixing is against the law, and they don't overtly fix prices. So it's hard.
They caress, they manipulate, but they don't fix.
They do things like hold items back. It's
but that should be illegal. Like, I mean, because like, picture this. Like, so let's say back with the Beanie Babies, I'm pulling all the ridiculous things out. But like, imagine if they said, oh, well, there are only 100 of these Beanie Babies, but then slowly a year later, they pulled out another 50 and another 50. It would have ruined the market, kind of thing. So like, literally, that's the definition of price fixing.
Right. But I think it gets into a gray area because, again, it's not an overt action, whereas if you just say we're just not going to put it up on market right now because we're going to either wait for the market to improve, or we feel if we have too many of these out there it's going to hurt the price.
That second statement, that's the price fixing.
Yeah, but
if we we have these objects that are available for sale, but we're not going to make them available because it will make it so they're less valuable. That is literally the definition of price fixing in my mind, keeping in mind I'm not a professional lawyer.
Yeah. Price fixing is a little bit more like, and I believe they did get in trouble for this once. I think they were doing it with commissions. I might be wrong, so I'm going to say this is my opinion right now. But I'm almost positive this was a thing that happened where two of the big auction companies were calling each other and say, "Hey, so and so has this for sale. This is the commission we quoted them. Make sure you're not less than us."
I remember this coming out.
Yeah.
Yes,
they got in a lot of trouble for that because that was just overt price fixing. I mean, that was criminal.
Right, but like basically, like it goes down to like the interpersonal relationships of like, I didn't lie to you, honey, and it's like, no, you lied through omission is what you did, like that. So basically, the auction industry feels like basically a huge lie of omission, because we're going to say, here's this amazing Basquiat, $98 million is the asking price, only one on the market, and then like 6 months later, here's another Basquiat, asking price $110 million, only one on the market. Like, and then with full knowledge, they have a warehouse full of them that they're going to like dole out every 6 months to a year.
And that's a lot of how, especially up and coming artists, are handled. The Pennsylvania Impressionists, I don't know if you're familiar with them.
I am not. Please educate me.
A group of artists from the first half of the 20th century that were all, some of them were trained in Europe, and they were the American Impressionist style. Very, very good painters. Some of my favorites. And they were relatively unknown on a national and international level about 20, 30 years ago. There's a place down in Lambertville, New Jersey, that has most of them, or a good collection of them. And a lot of them have come through there, and he has slowly put them into auctions and into collectors' hands, and the prices have built and built and built and built. George Sauter, who is one of the best painters among that whole group from Bucks County, absolutely phenomenal landscape painter, one of the best nightscapes painters I've ever seen. His prices went in a course of about a decade. You could have picked up a Sauter for, I think, around 50, 60,000. And now he's well over $250,000, through this sort of slow process of, and, a lot of it is an investment on the dealer's part where they're putting a lot of money into these paintings and they're taking the time to get it to market. But it's not this, I have the paintings here, we'll just put one here, we'll put one here, whatever they bring, they bring. It's go to the auction house, I have these paintings, this is what I want for them as far as a reserve. Put them in and they slowly edge the price up, and as they get more interest in the artwork, which is generally driven by the attention they get for the amount of money they bring in an auction, the interest goes up. Now you can get it into the hands of more collectors. You start creating demand. It's a process, and it's manipulated to an extent, because you could have a warehouse full of them and could sell them all tomorrow and just be done with it. But I'm going to put 3 out this year. I'm going to put 6 out in the next quarter.
Well, they would even do it too. They'd be like, "I'll put 3 in London, and I'll put 2 in Hong Kong,"
Yeah.
and it's like it's not even just manipulating how many, but how many where
Yeah.
were they available? Because like they could either intentionally put it where there are a lot of collectors, or intentionally where there are not a lot of collectors, to try and draw attention to maybe something else they put in the auction that maybe would be something. Yeah, it saddens me. I mean, my background is like fine artist. I'm a purist. I believe in merit and quality and craftsmanship. Sort of as soon as it leaves my studio, it becomes a commodity that is just bought, sold, and traded on the nature of it being a widget, and how much is somebody willing to pay for that widget.
Well, and I've seen it as an auctioneer where I've come across work that's beautiful, old stuff, living artist work, but because nobody has any idea who it is, it's either not going to bring that much money or I couldn't sell it at all. We had a little piece once, just as an example. I'll give you 2 contrasting examples. At a sale we did, it was one of our better sales. We had just a beautiful little painting, small, maybe 8 by 10, something like that. Not a very big piece of a 19th century luminist work. Beautiful landscape. I mean, as very well done. The person was obviously well trained. Excellent piece. Unsigned. I couldn't attribute it to anybody. It was kind of a generic sort of European scene, cottage on a river type of look. I think maybe it brought $1,000 or something. There was no way to attribute it to anyone, any school. It was just very nice painting. We get another painting in on a different sale, again, about the same size, but it said Innes on it, as in George Innes. Now, we did not make any claims about it being, it's definitely one of his, or we can attribute it to anything. And it looked like an Innes. We took pictures of it, showed everybody what it was. It was properly stretched for the period in a period frame, and it said in red, Innes. Anybody could have painted that signature, and I had no way of proving the provenance. Well,
Correct.
That painting brought about $4,500, I think, on the gamble that they were going to be able to prove that it was a George Innes. That's what art is in the market. It has to be something the next person can make money on, or they don't really want to hear about it. Now, there's been a lot of collectors over the years that have good eyes and the ability to create a collection, either a cohesive collection of artists, because they can see the potential in them, and then wind up making money years down the road because whoever they collected caught on and they were able to cash in on their good taste later in life. And then there's people who collect things that never really go anywhere. They might have beautiful collections. They might have stunning works of art that they picked up, or a lot of very interesting things, or historical things, but they're just not all that valuable because nobody cares. Because nobody looks at it and goes, oh, I would like that piece, because then when I put it in my collection, it's going to increase the value of my collection. Everybody's worried about increasing the value of their collection. I've met very few pure collectors that collected because the piece may not be worth money, but had historical significance, was part of whatever it was they were collecting, military or, art, books, trains, coins. They just needed that piece to fit into their collection. To me, those are always the most interesting collections because they don't care about the value. They care about what it is, how it fits into the collection, how it fits in historically, and they can tell a story with their collection. It's really interesting. But the reality is a lot of people collect because to them it's an investment, and most of those people wind up getting burned in the end.
And again, that just saddens me across the board. But more so, it saddens me. The part that saddens me is really just the fact that like people go into buying arts as a way to make money, and they don't give a shit about the work. So like chances are most of the people who buy works at auctions are probably never going to hang it in their homes.
No.
They're just going to put it in storage or whatever, and then they're just going to wait until the market swings their way and then resell it. And that, I mean, the point of a piece of art is to be experienced and enjoyed and be, in the home or wherever, institution, whatever. I mean, fuck, I don't even want to start on museums and how many pieces of art they have in storage versus on display, but fuck.
That annoyed me. Right before the pandemic hit full force in New York City, I was there at the MoMA. I wanted to see a Soutine. I was looking for a Soutine that they had that I really wanted to see it because Soutine's such a weird artist. And I wanted to get a close look at this painting. It was in storage. It's like almost everything I wanted to see that day was in storage. I think the Rothkos were all in storage. And I was like, what are you doing? The Museum of Modern Art. That's the only reason I even wanted to be in here, is to see those couple of pieces. And it's weird how they do that.
Don't get me wrong. Most of those large institutions, the MoMA, Met, Tate, all these kind of places, if they have something in their collection and you want to see it and you make prior arrangements, they can coordinate to have it available for you. They are very good about that. I don't want to discourage anybody with that. They will give you access. Like I grew up at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C.,
which is an incredible museum.
Oh, it's amazing. And I could and they have a fuck ton of stuff in storage, but I could literally just like call up and be like, I mean, this is pre-internet, so I could call up and be like, hi there, I'd like to look at this Edvard Munch print. Can you have it available for me at 9 a.m. on Monday? And they were like, sure, no problem. Just ask for so-and-so. And like, I would just walk in, no visitors badges, no crazy 80s security stuff. I'd just wander in. I could have been anybody, but it was great. I mean, they have that is a great luxury that we have, having these institutions and having them in these collections and available to us upon request. But fuck, why do they store them? So, I mean, they store so much. I mean, did you hear Malcolm Gladwell's whole thing about this?
No, I didn't.
He has his podcast, which I love. Thank you, Malcolm Gladwell, for creating it, called Revisionist History.
He's the author, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The Turning Point and all those, and New York Times writer, I think, or New Yorker. Oh shit! I think New Yorker. But he had this podcast where he went in and was like, "Why do museums have like 90 to 95% of their collection not on display?" And tried to find out why that is. And it's basically just old colonial position of like, we simply need to own these things.
Yeah, and it's also about getting people through the door. What can they put on display that will make people come through the door? Because they're unfortunately
no. Most of those things, they just basically they want to own it so that nobody else owns it. That's it. Like
I can see that.
And these are things they never intend to have on display, but they just don't want anybody else to have it.
It's strange. Like that just happened with that supposed Da Vinci they sold. That whole thing made me crazy, especially as an auctioneer.
I love that story because I was living in the United Arab Emirates when that got bought, and we were all like, "Ooh, let's get on the yacht and see if we can find the Salvator Mundi."
But the whole thing around it, and this is just something that I thought, as part of the industry, it kind of made me crazy. Was I forget who the auction house was, and I should know, but they go, "It's a Da Vinci," and such an expert, says it's a Da Vinci. Well, it turns out that expert went, "No, I never said that. I looked at it and said that
of the style."
Yeah. And they somehow manipulated that into being, it's a Da Vinci. And because when I saw the headlines about it was Da Vinci, what Da Vinci's for sale? There's like 6. Like, where is this Da Vinci coming from? I'd been familiar with the painting, but I never knew that anybody even had thought that it was definitely one of his. And they sold it as a Da Vinci, and they never backed down from their stance on that. What did they get? $450 million for it? And then the gentleman bought it, and 6 months later, they were like, "Where is it? Where did it go?" And the guy's like, "It's on a boat. I don't know."
Yeah, that's the last story I heard. But I also heard he was supposed to be gifting it to the Abu Dhabi Louvre at some point.
Abu Dhabi Louvre. It's just the whole thing.
Is it Louvre Abu Dhabi or Abu Dhabi Louvre? I'm not sure.
I have no idea.
It's Louvre Abu Dhabi.
They're buying that. That whole area is just, they're buying up a ton of paintings. Qatar bought those 2, were they Cézannes? Or was one a Cézanne and one $250 million. It was the most money paid for that genre of painting. It was the Absinthe Drinkers, I think, was one of them. I can't remember the other painting.
Well, I mean, but that whole thing of like the Middle East buying up a bunch of art, it goes back to exactly what I just said about the museums in America, about they just basically want to own it so that nobody else owns it.
Yeah.
Because they're like, we have the money. And at this point, they now have the Louvre Abu Dhabi, so they can have legitimately, store it and keep it and manage it. So they're like, well, then we should fucking own it.
But it limits the market in a weird way because, first of all, once you're at those kind of prices, there's a limited amount of people that can write those checks.
Not in the Middle East, but okay.
And that's why a lot of it's going out there because they have that money and they have it. If they're not borrowing, they're not pretending, they have the money. And then you run into the next problem where we can't just, chuck it in a storage unit or, hang it in your living room over the fireplace. Most of these works need to be in climate controlled spaces or in a way that they're not going to get damaged. So that also limits who's going to buy them. And to me, that end of the art market is completely outside of the average collector.
And yet it's what we see in the news most often.
Because it's fantastic. It's the high price, like, oh, they paid, millions and millions of dollars for these, especially when it's postmodern or abstract expressionism, which the general public has a hard time with. And then you go, well, it sold for 150 million. And you look at Franz Klein and you go, it's just some black streaks. And it's like,
yes, done by Franz Klein.
Yeah, but it's Franz Klein, which I should, bringing his name up to jump to another subject. I know where there's a mural in a bar room he drank at that is stuck to the wall. It's absolutely amazing, but it's stuck to a masonry wall. People who have it want to sell it, but I have no idea how to get it out of there.
Take the whole wall, just like a Banksy.
We tried to negotiate with them about having it removed from the wall, and they didn't want to hear. They were worried about the structure of the building and this, that, and the other thing is, guys, you're making this complicated.
Yeah, but for the amount of money, you can easily rebuild that wall that you're going to get for a one of a kind.
It's a gigantic mural too. The story we got is he used to drink there all the time. He had no money for booze. So he said, look, I'll paint a mural on your wall if you just let me drink. It's beautiful. It's one of his expressionist style landscapes of the surrounding town that the bar was in. And it's absolutely stunning. Yeah, they were very difficult to even talk to. But that's the stuff people see, to go back to my initial point. And it's, it gets clicks in all of these articles and gets, nobody sells a newspaper anymore, so I can't say that. And it only perpetuates this nonsense about, buy art because you're going to make money on it later in life. And it's like, that was never the purpose. It's great from the business side of it as an auctioneer, but it's also nerve-wracking too when you see something that should be of value, that is quality, that is a fantastic work of art, be it glass or sculpture or a painting, and you should be able to market it. And you put it out onto the market and you put it into an auction with other stuff of the same caliber. And people go, what is this? Is it signed? Who'd made it? Oh, it's a nobody. I can't do anything with that. And it would happen all the time, Yeah.
So artists that are listening, sign your works.
And then become somebody.
Well, but just even sign it, for fuck's sake. Never put a piece of art out that's not signed, because they will never be able to be attributed for 100% to you in your life nor your death. So
what also would be helpful, as speaking from an antique dealer auctioneer, is you could have your strange signature on the front of the piece, sign it on the back somewhere in block letters so you can make out what your name spells. I don't know how many times it took me a week to figure out a signature because I just wasn't either familiar with the work or had never seen a piece. And it was this weird squiggle. And I don't know what that is. So now I'm going to have to ask a lot of questions.
Okay, well, that brings up a whole topic that I'm fascinated with personally, which is certificates of authenticity and provenance.
Oh, okay. So,
I'll give you my sort of perspective on it. I am obsessive about, so I'm a photographer and I do fine art prints that I sell in editions and all this. And I create certificates of authenticities where I fill out like all the information on it, like what ink, what paper, what printer, it's much technical materiality kind of information as I can. Mostly I do that because I believe it's someday that there'll be a conservator who will need to repair my works because I am that egotistical. And so I do all that. And then then I sign the certificate of authenticity, and I have matching hologram numbered stickers that I put on the certificate, and they're tamper proof. And I also put it on the back of the print. So they have matching, and then I sign the print also. And I do all of it in pencil because I know that is the best, because ink will fade over time.
Ink can fade. It takes a long time to fade, especially India ink or some of the older stuff. That's a great thing to do for your prints. Since you make prints, that's what you make as an artist. As in the secondary market, that's what people will be expecting. The problem with some of that, we had tried to sell for someone two Chagall serigraphs that were signed by Chagall, supposedly. And this is It's just when the print market tanked. Couldn't get anybody to even look at them. And we even called around, tried to broker a deal to another gallery for them and this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, no, we don't. Nobody wants them. No, because prints from a painter or prints from any other type of fine artist The photographers are the only ones that seem to be exempt from this because that's the nature of the medium. Is you're wasting your money on the print market. Like you got a Warhol silkscreen, that's different. That's what he was doing, But we had like was it a Jasper Johns, or who was his partner's name?
I don't know.
I can't remember. I think it might have been.
We'll just go with Jasper Johns.
We'll go with Jasper Johns. It was a print, and it was a signed print.
Nobody's going to fact check this, so it's okay. Go ahead.
That's probably a good thing. And it was a print, an edition that he was involved in making, signed by him, and all that good stuff. I couldn't, and some of my best art customers, I couldn't even get them to look at it. It's like they wanted nothing to do with it.
I find that fascinating because I'm a works on paper person. I like works on paper, quite honestly, most of the time, more than a painting many times, because I'm not sure why, quite honestly, but I do love a good works. Probably because they're reasonably affordable, and oftentimes they're a little bit more experimental, so maybe they're not like, specifically their style, but you can see it's oftentimes the works on paper are the things that artists do when they're transitioning between things, so like they're known for this and they're going to test out the market with these prints and see if they can sort of evolve into this next thing. And so I love seeing that sort of evolutionary period. I am not the standard art collector because I'm actually an artist and have knowledge about art and care about art and love the process of it and all that. I don't see it as a commodity. So I'm not your general buyer. So there.
It was difficult for me in a lot of times because being from an arts background and being an artist myself and having collectors myself, and then trying to sell somebody's art in the auction and antique setting, it sometimes make me absolutely insane because it's like, there's no reason you shouldn't want this piece just because it's not by a well-known artist or it's from an artist that's known, but it's not the thing he's known for or she's known for. And so therefore its value is less. It's like, I never got that part of it. And it's, one of the reasons that drove me to quit eventually. It's like, I don't get the buying mentality sometimes. It can make you insane. It's like, not only do they think of art as a commodity and only a commodity, but it's got to meet these specific conditions all the time, and if it doesn't meet their specific, whatever, and a lot of it's made up by the collectors. Like if it doesn't meet these specific conditions, they just don't want it. It's like all that stuff Picasso did at the end of his life. A Picasso from his Cubist phase is worth millions and millions and millions. That stuff he did later on, where all those little drawings of the flowers or his stoneware, it's like people, they don't even want to look at it. They don't want to admit it's a Picasso. They want nothing to do with it.
That quite honestly, that just felt like a money grab.
Oh, absolutely.
Really, come on.
But that was Picasso. I mean, his whole life was a money grab.
It was, but like at the point where he actually could grab money, he was like, fuck yeah, I'll do that stupid stoneware thing for you. Sure. You're going to pay me how much? Absolutely. Don't get me wrong. I respect him as both an artist and a business person, but he does put a bad impression on a lot of people as well.
He does when you really get into his history and the way he lived. He can leave a bad taste in your mouth.
Oh, yeah. Beside the racist, sexist, all kinds of other things in his lifetime. But yes, anyways. So...
Yeah, and then you mentioned provenance too, which is a big thing for collectors. Sometimes the value of a piece lies in just who had it before you have it. It could be the most worthless thing in the world. If somebody put up Michael Jordan's sweatband, that he wore during one of his championship games, people would pay millions for it. It doesn't matter if it was a rag cut off of like a bed sheet or something. They wouldn't care what the thing was. It's just the fact that he had it. And so provenance is a big thing in the business.
Well, but it's not even just like you're saying, like who owned it that way, but also a lot of people will buy things saying like, oh, this was in such a collection of the Guggenheim or the collection of the, the Rothschilds or whatever. Like if the piece was at one point collected by another prominently known collector, that is its own little oeuvre and collecting style as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's been things that even turned out to be fake that were part of important collections that are still valuable.
No, fake things in the art world. That's shocking.
Coins were a big one. I mean, there were forgers of coins that were so good that the forgeries themselves became valuable because they were famous for what they forged and the fact that they got away with it. It's such a strange part of the business. Like, well, who had it before me? Oh, nobody? I don't want it. It's like, it was from it's from the House of Windsor? Oh, sure.
Well, I mean, but that's the thing is like, so like, let's say there's like two pieces made by the exact same artist and one has provenance. So it doesn't even matter what the provenance is. It has provenance.
Right.
So you have paperwork, receipts, certificates of authenticities, whatever. And then another piece done by the exact same artist, let's say same style, same quality, same time period even, and has no provenance. It's so much less valuable. Why is provenance like create that value?
It can create a sense of legitimacy, especially if it's from a well-known collector or a well-known collection. So it's like, oh, well, it was in that collection, so that means it must be good.
No collector is 100% right. I mean that it was in so and so's collection. Oh bullshit. I've seen some shit art in some really great collections.
That's a thing that happens, and especially in the antique end of it. There's so much stuff out there that isn't what it's purported to be, and it makes collectors nervous. There's so many fakes, forgeries, almosts
from the workshop of
that wind up in circulation. And collectors get very nervous because everybody that's been in the business in any serious way has been burned by one of these items where they thought they had it and thought they could prove it. And then it goes into somebody who knows much more than them. And they go, no, that's not real. And you can lose a lot of money. And so people get very nervous, especially, as the price goes up, the nervousness goes up. And so be able to prove where something came from, and the further back you can go, the better. It just adds a level of comfort when you're spending that kind of money. And it can work against you in the sense that a collector had sent in a group of illustrations from a couple of artists that were very well known. And when we got them in, we looked them over, and there was no reason for them to be fake. They were too insignificant as far as works from their collection to be something that anyone would fake. It would just be a stupid thing to fake.
Which is exactly why they were fake.
Well, we never were able to prove whether they were fake or not because we sold them and the person who bought them sent them out to get authenticated. And the answer they got back from the experts, and this is a well-known company that this is what they do, they authenticate this type of stuff, wasn't that, oh, these are fake, these are definitely fake, well, you were ripped off. The answer came back was, we will not say yay or nay on these at all. What it really came down to was there's such insignificant pieces from these artists' collections that we don't even want them in the market. It's just going to dilute the market, So
well, that whole thing of like not being willing to actually say, yes, I guarantee that this is by somebody is such a like just scam bullshit thing because it hurts the people's reputations if it ends up being wrong.
Right.
I mean, I get all the reasons for it and all this kind of stuff, but there should be like a regulatory body, like they can just say like, yes, it is. I mean, like the Warhol Foundation kind of they used to, or at one point, and I know there's the Catalogue Revuses in Paris or whatever.
That's you're on that one.
There are these official catalogs of like Cezanne and Matisse.
Oh yeah, when they
like
refer to it's in the catalog as
Yes, and so like they're the official catalog. And if it's not in the catalog, then it's not approved. And you in the body, the group of people who decide what's in the catalog and what's not in the catalog, totally behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Like nobody knows who they are, nobody knows why or how they make their decisions, and they can just make whatever fucking decision they want. So you can take them something that like you have all the provenance in the world that says that this is a Cezanne, and they could just go, no, it's not.
Yep. And it happens way more often than you would think, where at a certain level, people like it could be, and it could come down to something as silly as the person who owns it, no one likes. Everybody knows who owns that piece. They can't stand them. They're not going to say they'll wait 25 years after they die and go, oh, we were wrong the whole time. It turned out to be. And that happened with another Da Vinci a few decades ago. It was a sketch. It has like a 100-year history or something of people buying it, thinking it was this thing and that thing. And then somebody bought it. I'm sorry I'm so vague about some of these details because I had so many of these stories in my head. But somebody had purchased this drawing, and it's very famous now, and it's accepted as a Da Vinci. And they were just very stubborn about it being authenticated as a Da Vinci. And it wound up being sold at an auction as a Da Vinci, and it brought quite a bit of money. I can't remember how the original person who owned it wound up with it. But they had paid like $40 for it or something. And it just sat in a shop, and then somebody bought it out of the shop for a pittance. And then they just, over time, they got experts to look at it and say, well, it kind of looks like a Da Vinci. And then it was, oh, it really looks like a Da Vinci. And it's like, oh, it's a Da Vinci. And nobody to this day could still really prove yay or nay, because it was a sketch. He didn't sign it, and I mean, you could date the paper to his era, I'm sure, but he had a studio. He had people working for him. It could have been a student. It could have been anybody.
Yeah.
It could have been
his lover.
It could have been somebody who was extremely competent and copied it from that era. It's
could have been a corporate espionage person that was copying his work and taking it over to a rival studio in his handwriting.
It's funny how things like that sort of languish, in the dark forever, because nobody can prove it until they decide they can prove it. And then the opposite could happen. Things, like I said, could be in collections for years, and then somebody pull it out and say, no, actually, it's not real. And that's happened too. And it's just a weird game. What gets frustrating about it is the value attached to it. When you thought it was a Rembrandt, it was worth all kinds of money. Now that it's proven it wasn't, you suddenly don't want it anymore. So what is it that you're attaching the importance to? Is it just the money? Is it the historical? Is it the fact that he or she touched it? Where does the value come from? Because it's not in the quality of the work. It's got nothing to do with it. Over and over.
That's correct.
Because there was that book that was written by the forger who had been selling work through all of the major auction houses. And he did it for years. That he would take mediocre artists that sold well, but weren't anybody important. And he would fake it right down to the last detail. And he would just bring them in and say, I don't know anything about them. You tell me, is it any good? And the auction house, oh, it's such and such. And yeah, we could sell these. And, and it was stuff that was 50,000, 60,000, 100,000. So in that world, it wasn't a lot of money, but every one of them was fake.
Yeah, I know. I've had 2 forgers on the podcast.
I wonder if it was one of the gentlemen I'm talking about.
David Henty was the one who was very, very good. He was very open about his practices.
This guy wrote a book, and I might be wrong, but I don't think he ever really got in trouble for it. I think as a matter of fact, he helped turn in the auction houses that were doing it.
No, I think the guy you're talking about is like German or Austrian.
Yeah, I
or
can't
something
remember.
Like that. I know who you're talking about. I can picture, there's a famous picture of him like sitting outside in his garden painting, and I know who you're talking about. Can't think of his name though.
But then there was the big case with the gentleman that was faking all the high-end postmodern stuff that was being run through all the major auctions. He was faking Rothkos and Pollocks. It was just a few years back. There's a documentary about it on Netflix. I can't remember the.
I saw it. Yeah. It was going through museum or through a gallery, and the dealer was then passing it on, and it was hundreds of millions of dollars worth of works.
And I feel bad for the collectors because they're being sold a bill of goods. And when you get into that arena, it gets a little tough to tell a fake from a real one if the forge is really, really good because of the type of work. And the only thing I think they finally caught them on was the type of paint being used. Like there was a pigment that was used that wasn't even manufactured yet. And that was the only reason they were able to nail them.
Which, quite honestly, that is like forgery 101, for fuck's sake. Like, seriously. Like, I mean, of all the stupid shit to get caught for, that is forgery 101. Like, I'm even smart enough to know that you have to get paints and inks from the time period and don't ever use anything that didn't exist in that time period. Come on.
Yeah, or at the very least, make your own pigments. That's still a possibility to make your own pigments from the actual minerals.
Well, that depends on, because after the first atomic bomb, that won't work. So, because anything you make now has that atomic radiation in it, that if it was from prior to the first atomic bomb, there was none of that radiation.
All the new paint fluoresces under blacklight. And that's actually
Is that true?
Yeah, that's one of the techniques we would use to see if a painting was restored. Because sometimes, especially on oil paintings, the varnish would crack the painting, and so they would fill the cracks. And if it was done well by, an actual conservator, it'd be fine. It'd look nice. And usually it'd have a certificate that restored by blah, blah, blah. But if you get some amateur that didn't know what they were doing, or they were trying to fake something in the painting or mess with it, you'd put a black light on it and you could see a lot of the pigments would fluoresce, and you'd go, well, this has been messed with, and it could make a big difference in the value of the painting, especially if it was done by some amateur that had no idea what they were doing.
Sadly, that is all too often, but yes.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that you have to look out for too in the business. And one other reason collectors get nervous is like, it could be the thing you all think it is by the person with provenance. Was it messed with? Did somebody mess with it?
Okay, you're making it a negative. We'll call it restored poorly.
Well, there's restored, which everybody could handle that. And then there's messed with.
It could have been done with the best of intentions.
Well, and then there's people who do it for fraudulent reasons. For instance,
it's true.
The mass-produced items that are rare, which is a sort of an oxymoron, the color of something could have been rare. Like maybe they made 1 million of whatever in red, and they, for whatever reason, they made 2,000 in blue. Either they were prototypes or they just didn't sell well, so they cut production. Well, the blue ones are really, really rare, and so they're worth a lot of money. It's nothing to stop somebody from taking one of those red ones and spray painting them blue if they could do it. And it happened a lot. The watch market's a big one. There's a tremendous amount of value in the types of dials that are on things like a Rolex. The original dial, because Rolex would, at any point in its history, you could send the watch back, and if there's something wrong, they'd put a new dial on it. Well, a Rolex from the late 50s, or the 60s that has its original dial, even if it's completely messed up and banged around, is worth far more than one that was replaced by the company later on. So you have to watch out for that kind of stuff. So people will fake those sort of things. They'll change the lettering on it. They'll redo the stencils, or they'll put a new dial on because the other one was, gone. The watch was just in that bad a shape, and it changes the value. And in that instance, I can see not wanting it as much because you go, well, this is not the thing you said it was. It's like the difference between a restored car and an original car. It's much more special to say, well, this is exactly how it came the day the person bought it. So it's much more interesting because it's kind of like looking back in time. It's a little different than saying, well, it did look like this, but this is a brand new dial, or these are brand new hands, or like in a car, we put a brand new engine in it. It's a little bit different.
I'm not a car guy. I'm just going to believe you on that.
Cars will make you insane. That's a whole, as far as auctions go, that's a whole separate world than the antiques and fine art. They do things very differently. They're run a little differently. We never got into that end of it. It's kind of a very close-knit group of people too. It's hard to break into that as an auctioneer.
Oh, yeah, I don't know anything about. I can't talk intelligently about it at all. But are there any topics that I didn't even ask you about? Some, like, behind the curtain, things people don't say publicly, things that I really want you to talk about. Things that nobody else will talk about that you can because you're not in it anymore.
It's a frustrating business. It's a lot of nonsense. A lot of it is manipulation sort of on all levels, where it's like everybody's just trying to get the most money. Unfortunately, there's a lot of unscrupulous characters in the business, from the dealer end to the buyer end to the seller, where people will do whatever they can to get the most out of something. You got to be careful and be educated when you're in the antique and auction business. You got to know what you're looking at, where it came from, who's selling it, because a lot of stuff just gets circulated from one auction house to the next, from one dealer to the next, and it just stays in perpetual circulation because there's really no end user that wants it, but people have money tied up in this stuff. And when you got money tied up in something, you're going to do what you can to protect your investment, which leads to a lot of strange practices in the business.
Such as,
like hoarding things, letting it out a little at a time. In the art world, they try to get pieces into the hands of important collectors in order to drive up prices. The willingness or lack of willingness to authenticate something in certain genres of the business. Sports is a big one, with signed baseballs and things like that. I think the statistic is like 70% of the balls signed Mickey Mantle are completely and utterly fake. He had everyone sign them for him. I can't tell you how many.
Again, I watch Pawn Stars.
It make you crazy. And from the uninitiated, people who are just getting into it or think they're going to make a lot of money with it, most of what you see on TV and in these shows it's just nonsense. Some of those TV shows, it's not people walking in off the street with just happen to have an item in their attic garage. They call these people. I know the roadshow, or what I've been told by people who've been called by them, when they go into a town, they call the collectors up and say, "Can you bring in some piece, something good. So he's like, if they went from town to town and hoped they were going to find something good, I mean, there'd be a lot of towns that go in and find absolutely nothing.
Yes.
What that doesn't make very good TV.
Well, I mean, I don't blame them for that.
Yeah.
It's not a guarantee. It's not saying, hey, come down to our thing. We will be certain to put you on. It's just, please come down just in case we don't find anything interesting. At least we have you as a backup.
People who are looking to sell items or think they're going to get into it get a false perception, like these types of items are just falling out of trees. Like everybody's going to find something in the attic that's worth 10,000, 20,000, 100,000. It's like, no.
I have a low collection. I believe there is something in there worth it. Yes, but we all think that.
It's possible too, but it makes the business very strange. Most of what I saw in my career of 16 years, I turned away because it just wasn't anything of any value.
Okay, well, I have a question specifically about something that I've been seeing happen more and more. Now, it was not around when I was young, so or maybe it was and I just didn't know it, was that it seems like a lot of younger living artists are intentionally skipping the galleries and going directly to selling their works in auctions.
I don't know if I can comment on that because I didn't really experience that when I had my license. I could see why. Galleries can be very difficult to deal with.
It seems like it's more prominent in Europe, to be honest.
Well, quite frankly, I always had more success going directly to collectors, as gauche as it might seem. I did put a few of my pieces in my own auction and sell them. I always did very fair with it. Because if you believe in your work, you're good at what you do, you shouldn't be afraid to put it up on the open market and then let the collectors dictate what they want to pay. It's a very scary thing to do.
Yeah, no, okay. I'm gonna push back on that one because I've had, like, in America, so we should caveat this one. In America, there is this trend of having benefit auctions.
Mm-hmm.
I fucking hate those things when they ask artists to donate a piece to a benefit auction. And then they go up and you say, okay, well, the reserve price should be whatever, this $1,000 for this piece. And they end up selling it for $500. Because to them, just any money is good money because the artist gave the work for free.
Right.
And so any money is profit for them. They don't care if it actually meets the minimum or the actual retail value of the thing. They just want the money for the benefit. Fucking drives me nuts. How did that get started? And why do people think that these benefit auctions are like yard sales where they can get everything for the cheapest possible price? It so angers me.
It can be difficult because sometimes the buyers sometimes get this idea that, oh, it's at auction because they just need to get rid of it. And they seem to misunderstand what an auction's supposed to do. You put a bunch of people in a room that want the same things, and now you ask them, well, how much are you willing to spend? Are you willing to spend more than that guy or that woman? And well, then you're going to have to pay more. But an auction is also designed to move a lot of stuff quickly. If you run a real auction where everything's going to go out the door that day, it shows you what the liquid value of an item is that day. It takes an asset and turns it into cash immediately. And it gives it the best possible chance for the most money because you're doing it in front of a whole bunch of buyers and not just a couple. That's why sometimes, the business gets a little manipulated because that is what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to take this asset and turn it into cash as quickly as you can do it. Sometimes it doesn't work the way you wanted it to. Sometimes the people standing there going, I don't really want it. I'll buy it, but I'm not going to give you what you want. I'm only going to go so far on it. When you get into the arena where everything is supposed to have a value, this thing is supposed to be worth that much. So now what do? Do you sell it for less and really irritate the buyer or the seller rather, and you'll never get another thing from them again to sell? Or do you annoy the buyer and say, well, yeah, it's up for auction, but we're going to start here or you're not going to get it at all?
Well, that's my problem is that these benefit people, they're nonprofits and I get it. I ran a nonprofit. I understand that side of it, but there should be some fair equity that goes into this, because they're basically asking an artist to take a piece that they could sell for $5,000 and donate it for free to this benefit to try and raise money. And then they end up selling the price for below retail price, which then ends up hurting the artist's reputation, because then it's like, oh, I could go buy it for retail, or I could just wait till they donate another one to another auction and I can get it for a below retail price. Like, come on.
I mean, there's a couple ways you could look at that, I guess. You could say, this is what your work generally sells for, say the $5,000. You could go to your accountant and then say, well, I donated $5,000 this year. Let's write that off as a business expense.
Correct. Yes.
And then if it goes for less than that, you could always look at it and go, am I overcharging for my work? Would I sell more if I lowered my price? And it's a weird thing I have in my head, where I could see it from both sides.
That's not the conversation. You're making it like we as the artist are doing the wrong thing. No, the people doing the wrong thing are these benefit auctions. Like, I am to the point where I will not, no matter how much I love the nonprofit, I will not participate in those unless they set a fair market value as the beginning part. Like, because the point of a benefit auction is to benefit.
Yeah.
Like, so people should be spending more money, not trying to like lowball getting this thing. And it sort of drives me nuts. Don't get me wrong. If I go to a benefit auction, of course I want to buy it for below retail price, but as the person putting something in the auction, I want to get retail price.
And that's the dilemma of every auction house in the world. Because as an auctioneer, you're the agent that has to deal with both sides. You have to deal with the seller, who is your primary financial responsibility because you're representing them. And then you have to have happy buyers. Because if you run an auction where every time somebody comes to your auction, it's very difficult to buy anything and they just get frustrated, they're not coming back. They got to score once in a while, because again, most people attending these auctions on a regular basis are people who resell. It's not all end users. The end user is going to come spend what they feel they're going to spend. If they get it, they get it. They don't, they don't. It's not a living for them. The person who comes to buy the majority of the stuff is the reseller, and they need to feel that the auction's fair, that, when they're bidding, they're bidding against real other bidders, because it's a whole nother thing we could talk about. And then on the other end, you got to make sure that the seller's happy. You're getting the most you can and the fairest way you can. And you have to constantly balance that. It's like, I know you want top dollar for the item that you have, but you have to be reasonable and think that maybe all the people coming just bought, they have 3 of them in their collection, or the dealers are all stocked up on them and they don't want them anymore, or they can't push them right now. And, you happen to just put your item up at a bad time, or it's not what you think it is, or it's worse condition than anyone I've ever seen before. It's one thing I learned as a valuable lesson was managing expectations. It's a constant management of expectations. And sometimes it's hopeless because everybody just wants it their way. And sometimes you catch a break and everybody's happy at the end of the day. It's constant management of expectations. That's the best way to look at it.
That is an excellent way to end the episode.
I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the conversation. We would appreciate it if you would share the podcast with your friends, family, coworkers, studio mates, anyone with an interest in the arts and creative endeavors. The building and strengthening of the arts and creative community is at the core of the mission for this podcast. They can subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We are produced by 5014. The audio was edited by Mickey at CushAudio Services, and the music was created by Pete Bybee. As many of you all know, the arts is often supported by grants, and so we appreciate the support of an EEA grant from Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway in an effort to work together for a green, competitive, and inclusive Europe. We would also like to thank our partners Hunt Kastner in Prague, Czech Republic, and Kunstsentrene i Norge in Norway. Links to EEA grants and our partner organizations are available in the show notes or on our website, wisefoolpod.com.